Okay, hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm so happy to see so many of you attending. I see quite a few familiar names and a lot of you who are attending our webinars for the first time. Welcome. It's my pleasure to begin. I'll be as brief as possible because I'm really excited to hand it over to the panel and the moderator. We have a wonderful discussion ahead, but please just allow me a few minutes to introduce Myriad USA and say a few practical notes. My name is Marina Tkachenko, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager at Myriad USA. Um, this webinar is part of Myriad USA's series on sharing best practices in fundraising, and it's designed to help nonprofit professionals worldwide enhance their fundraising practices. Myriad USA facilitates thoughtful, effective giving across borders. We provide donors with a simple and efficient platform to support nonprofit initiatives all around the world, but we also partner with nonprofits and offer them cost-effective solutions to raise funds in the US through a service called American Friends Fund. And if you'd like to learn more, there'll be some information in the chat to also get in touch. Today, our chat is closed. However, we do welcome your comments and questions and feedback just through the Q&A box at the bottom. We'll be able to see that and also have a moment live towards the end of the webinar to answer many of them live. So please feel free, and we encourage you to pop in there and add your comments as you listen to the discussion. And also translation is available through closed captioning. So if you click the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen in the Controls toolbar, you'll be able to select your preferred language. And lastly, the recording, but also any of the materials shared throughout the session will be shared post-event. Okay, great. Now I am super excited to I'll introduce our moderator, and the topic today is power mapping and community building from afar. And we have a quite exciting lineup of speakers that we'll hear from. And to moderate the discussion, I want to hand it over to Lindsay Marina Long. Lindsay is a fundraising strategist. She's focused on building strong, lasting donor relations and community across the giving spectrum. She works across channels and audiences to help organizations grow sustainable support, including helping shape the International Rescue Committee's Donor Community Rescue Collective. And in addition to that, she also partners with organizations like the Wikimedia Foundation and the New York Public Radio, and she's a frequent speaker on integrated fundraising and donor engagement at national and international industry events. Okay, Lindsay, please take us to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Marina. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Marina noted, I've been really lucky to work with nonprofits that are based in my home community in New York, across the US, but also with organizations around the world that are really seeking to build connections with various audiences and donors in the US and in their home communities. And really, across all of these contexts, one challenge always comes up, which is how do you build meaningful, sustainable relationships when you're not physically present in the same places that your constituents might be? We know that the US landscape, I'll speak from inside of it, is genuinely quite complex. It's shaped by formal institutions, of course, but also a lot of informal networks, relationships, and layers of influence that aren't necessarily always visible from the outside. And it's often these less visible dynamics that are the hardest to navigate. At the same time, it's important for us to realize that distance doesn't always mean geography. The ideas that we'll explore around power, access, and community matter just as much if you're thinking about how to build relationships across different constituencies closer to home. So today we'll be looking at how to navigate this distance more intentionally. So looking at where influence actually sits, how relationships form, and how trust gets built over time. We're going to talk about some of the ways you can identify friends, donors, and connectors who can engage with your organization and help you to understand the broader ecosystem that you're looking to grow in, and we'll tie it back into practice so you can leave with something concrete as you seek to build and sustain relationships, even if you're doing that work from a literal or even figurative distance. So, with that framing, I'm really excited to introduce our panelists who I think, as we discussed, really could probably interview themselves. I'm here more as a facilitator for their discussion, but they all bring really distinct yet complementary perspectives across these systems, networks, and communities. So, first, Claire Gibson Nangle is the acting vice president of development and communications at the Fund for Global Human Rights, where she leads resource mobilization and influences strategies across a global human rights portfolio. Claire has spent years advancing collaborative feminist approaches to fundraising and is deeply engaged in global networks of human rights resource mobilizers, working to shift power and strengthen the broader philanthropic ecosystem, including being a wise head in the MacArthur Foundation's 100 and Change competition, which I think is a tremendously fun title to claim, and as a Fix the Flow Fellow. Her work really brings a systems level perspective on power dynamics between funders and grantees and what it takes to build long-term sustainable relationships. So she's going to bring some excellent insights, I know, on power, trust, and partnership. Our second panelist is Sara Lomelin, founding CEO of Philanthropy Together, a global initiative working to democratize and diversify philanthropy through collective giving. Over the course of her career, Sarah has built and led major philanthropic networks, including the Latino Giving Circle Network, the largest network of Latinx philanthropists in the United States, and her leadership has been recognized through honors including the Time 100 Philanthropy List, Forbes 50 over 50, and the Nonprofit Times Power and Influence Top 50. Her work fundamentally challenges the questions of who participates in philanthropy and how they participate through models that can emphasize things like community, participation, and shared decision making. So, bringing that perspective on how to create these broader, more relational networks of support. And last but certainly not least, we're joined by Michelle Shireen Muri, co-founder of Community Centric Fundraising, a global movement engaging tens of thousands of people who are rethinking how fundraising is practiced and to more fully center community in that work. Michelle has worked with organizations across the spectrum. So think ACLU, Planned Parenthood, one of my favorites, the Decolonizing Wealth Project. And she also has a podcast, The Ethical Rainmaker, where she's helped surface really critical conversations about power, ethics, and history in the nonprofit sector, reaching more than 100,000 listeners. So she's got her voice in your ears there, and I definitely encourage you to check that out. Her work expands how organizations think about community, moving beyond traditional donor frameworks to consider a broader ecosystem of stakeholders, partners, and advocates. And I'm really excited to hear her rethinking community and belonging, especially when we think about how so much of this work is happening from a distance. So, panelists, thank you so much for joining us. And we're going to move through three sections. And I just want to start by having us step back and assess the landscape and, those specifics of that US context for folks who are looking to build out a network here. As I noted, it's this mess of unwritten rules, insider networks, and gatekeepers. And it's really hard to identify some of those folks at a distance. So I'd like to start by hearing your thoughts on this environment and the elements or lenses that are most helpful for making sense of this. And maybe, Sara, I'll turn to you first. Thinking about what's the most important thing you wish you'd known before kind of approaching your first major US donor or philanthropic institution.
Thank you, Lindsay. And hi, everybody. I'm super excited to be here with all of you. Sara Lomelin, in the US for 30 years, originally from Mexico City. Accent is here to stay. And I just want to start by saying that I always say that I got into philanthropy through the side door or the back door. I didn't start my career in philanthropy. So when I switched careers and I started as a fundraiser, I didn't know anything about the difference between a nonprofit, a foundation, the big funders, the private foundations, all, the different actors in the sector, all the different kind of hidden languages, the jargon. I mean, all the acronyms. I know in the US they love acronyms. So yeah, you need a dictionary to figure out all these, little names. I feel that the most important part would have been just focus on your secret sauce, and that is relationships, and that is connecting with people, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you're speaking with the program officer of a huge foundation, or a corporate foundation, or an ultra high net wealth donor. At the end of the day, they're people, and you need to connect with them at the personal level. So the beginning of my years in fundraising, I remember my first report to the Kellogg Foundation. I wrote 27 pages of a report, and my program officer was like, Sarah, no, like, please don't, right? Please don't write 27 pages of a report. Who's going to read this? And I said, well, it's an exercise for me just because I'm so excited of everything that we have done. She said, yes, but you need to be just, we're trusting you with this grant. So we just need the highlights. So I feel that's something that was extremely special for me during my years at the Latino Community Foundation, is that most of the people there, when I was working there, we didn't come from philanthropy. We came from donor organizing, for community organizing. So we didn't know the secret language of philanthropy, and that was our secret sauce. Like, we were known by, the crazy Mexican and the crazy Russian sending hugs and kisses to the funders, because we literally were sending an email saying, we hope your heart is happy today. And I would say, not because you are trying to, get into this big philanthropy apparatus, lose what makes you human, because at the end of the day, among hundreds or sometimes thousands of applications, that is what is going to give you that competitive advantage. Sorry, I went too late, too
Oh, I
long.
love that. It's about authenticity, I think is, kind of the core of that, which I think is tremendously valuable, and something that, if you are too trained, it kind of trains it out of you. But it's about being human, and our funders are human, our allies, our friends in this sector, they're all human too. So building that is so valuable. But Michelle, Claire, I want you to also be able to jump in and respond to what Sarah shared.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in if that's okay, Michelle, and I'll try to be brief so you can come in as well. So yeah, just quickly, thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I definitely agree with Sarah. This is all about relationships. Um, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about relationships um, in the framing of collaboration. Because, first of all, I kind of want to acknowledge how difficult the landscape is right now. I mean, as a sector, we are in a bit of a funding crisis with everything that happened in 2025. So, I'm in solidarity with all of you fundraisers. It is tough. And it might seem natural in this context that fundraising become more competitive, but I actually think the exact opposite is what is needed. We need more collaboration and more collaborative approaches to fundraising in order to navigate this landscape. And that, of course, is all about relationships. So, both internally and externally. Internally, we can even think a little bit more broadly. I've been kind of pushing that fundraising needs to come out of a silo, right? So organizations can't think of fundraising in a silo anymore. We really need holistic approaches to organizational sustainability. So this means as fundraisers, we need to be working really closely with programs colleagues. We need to be working really closely with our finance colleagues, thinking about potentially investment strategies or financial planning, closely with leadership. And then I think within this context, a trend that we're seeing is that donors want to be really close to the work. They want to have a really strong understanding of what's happening. So that makes it even more important than ever to work in partnership with our programmatic colleagues, right? On fundraising plans, on fundraising conversations, and especially on positioning them as the ones leading the work in these conversations. And externally, also, it's so important to have a network of kind of trusted peer fundraisers that can help support you, that can share intel. I have a group, I'm with the Fund for Global Human Rights, and among kind of global human rights and feminist funds, we have a peer space where we provide the support to each other. We share a lot of information. We try to lift each other up. And we look for joint action as well. So we've written a joint op-ed in the past, but ideally we're looking for opportunities for joint fundraising, joint bids. And just lastly, I'll say with your donors themselves, you can also think about collaboration beyond the direct funding conversation or relationship. This helps position you as a strategic and thought partner. This could be like just thinking to reach out on something strategic, a new strategy. I want a little bit of feedback, or maybe in a conference space, working together on a panel, but kind of keeping that relationship broad, which eventually could lead to additional funding. So I'll pause there so Michelle has time to come in.
No, those are beautiful comments, like both high level and practical. And I'll just add a tiny bit more. Um, I agree. Donors want to be close to the work, and this is an international crowd today. It's not always possible, right? Whether it's the topic or whether it's geographically. So creating, thinking about the decision making dials, what helps us give as individuals, and really thinking about what helps us feel close. I know I give to several organizations where I've never met anyone at the organization, and it doesn't matter to me because my values are so aligned and they're doing such great communication that I don't feel that I need to have more contact. They're keeping contact with me by having a steady flow of information available to me that makes me feel engaged, that makes me feel excited and continues the relationship building cycle all the way to inspiration without having personal contact because I'm not one of their major donors. So I think the role of communication is so important, so critical. Thinking about those decision making dials of how we make an emotional decision first, and then we back it up with logic. And part of that emotional decision, again, in storytelling, is the will this topic be good for the world? And we're like, will my investment be good for the world? Do I see myself how do I see myself in this context? I'm a good person. I am a funder of, the next generation. I am someone who believes in feminist values, etc. Like, what is the values tie? And then the trust piece, can the organization deliver what they say they can if I invest in it? So thinking about that when we're thinking about broad scale, communications and how we help people to feel closer, um, and be involved when they're so far away, but also yeah, just yesterday. So I'm a speaker, a facilitator, but I'm also a fundraising consultant. I'm building a case for support for an incredible organization. And I was talking to one of their major funders yesterday, and she has run a foundation for decades. She is an expert in the field because she has done so much digging and so much investing and so much exploring through her avenues and also through her privilege of having those funds. So she's actually a landscape expert. She knows who's doing what. She's keeping track of how effective it is or isn't. She's really tracking the topic as it goes, and for decades, right? Many of us that step into nonprofits might pick a topic and go with it for, I don't know, 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, switch jobs. We're in a new, where we might be in a new realm. But some of our funders, whether they're major donors or whether they represent foundations, are subject matter experts. They might be really great at strategy. They might be really good at networking. But something that I've heard time again, which Sarah was talking about too, is we may not take the best advantage of those relationships. People want to be helpful, and they want to be treated like partners, and they want to be treated like like other humans, not less necessarily like high net worth donors, but they are, our community has a lot to give us, and not just the high net worth donors, but in that context, there's just so much there for us to work with. And I wish that I would have known that and not been so like gingerly approaching major donors at the beginning of my career doing immigrant rights work. I really wish that I would have been like honest and, you know, talked about where things are confusing and asked questions and really, you know, I had some authentic relationships, but I wasn't like totally transparent because I didn't trust that I could be. And you really can.
What I think is interesting, there's this through line here. So we're all fundraisers, we're all involved in fundraising. Sadar, I think it's funny that you kind of said the thing that I think a lot of fundraisers feel, which is I entered through the side door. And none of us necessarily went into this saying, I'm going to be a fundraiser. And a lot of people think narrowly about fundraising as the ask for money component when we know it's this bigger, broader web of relationships and partnership building and community development within your constituency. So when we think about the power mapping piece of it, you know, we talk about this as a tool to understand how to maybe navigate a new space, but it can fall into something that's pretty narrowly defined too, which is this idea of, oh, it's a list of names, it's a who's who, but it's much bigger. I think it gets to this idea of partnership that you're talking about. And so this is kind of the second section of what we had laid out, which is thinking about this from a strategic lens of how we can use these relationships to better understand the systems and the places that we are, realizing that just like we're very layered, diverse individuals, all of our contacts are too. You know, they are not just donors, they're friends, they're allies, they want to do more, and they can help us build that legitimacy and reach. You know, they open doors, they let you know how influence moves. So I think it would be great to just kind of take a step back about this and consider, you know, what practice have maybe you seen making the biggest difference in building those types of relationships that aren't just about the transaction, and the ways that you've also been able to use storytelling in this process so that we're bringing people inside and we're bringing them closer. And Sarah, since we started with you last, and maybe Michelle, you can pick up on this again and kind of continue the thread, and then we'll pivot over to Sarah and Claire.
Absolutely. I think the number one tool when it was introduced to me several years ago, the number one tool I've seen as a game changer is community mapping. I cannot get over what kind of a difference it can make for an organization. And I'm talking about a group of stakeholders. They can be staff and board and donors and community members and the folks whose services are provided to, et cetera, just dependent on what topic. But thinking about like, and really stepping back and taking the time to think about 4 questions. And part of the giveaway of this webinar will be my guide to running your own community mapping session, to facilitating it yourself, if you want to. But what I see as the most valuable exercise is a series of 4 questions that really helps us center like who really is your community. So I've worked with organizations where the answer to that question is, well, everyone. You know, for example, environmental justice organizations might say everybody, the earth is important to everybody, our air quality, our water quality, like, you know, climate change, this is important to everybody. But what's true is that not everybody cares as deeply, right? We have affinity areas where we really feel like, okay, the environment is important to me and I get that here, but my heart is with animals or whatever, right? So everyone isn't our people. Like there are some people who are more our people than others in terms of the topic area. So really thinking about who do you provide services to? Who is the end user? My nieces went to an incredible preschool that was intergenerational. So my nieces were the community. They were who was being served. But then who is affected by the people who are being served? Well, obviously the families, the parents. You could even call the parents maybe inside of that circle, right? But I'm a crazy auntie. I love my nieces. I love that program. I love that it was intergenerational. They got to hang out with seniors. They're not afraid of wheelchairs or IV bags or oxygen tanks, like because they had a lot of exposure during preschool, right? So So I'm someone who is not a parent. I'm not the end user, but I'm in that third rung of people who care and have affinity for the topic area, but might not be the end user. That's where a lot of our donors often lie too. The crazy aunties who are like, yes, I love this. Look at this. I have time to give, right? I don't have children. I have more resources. And then the fourth one is, who are we missing? So, in immigrant rights work, earlier in my career, I spent 10 years in doing immigrant rights work. My family is Iranian, and I had never been in that realm before, and it was incredible and inspiring. And who we were missing, we were a lot of people were our were other service providers that were giving to us because they saw how important the work was, the direct service work, and they were providing direct services too, but they saw how incredible it was. Immigration attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, et cetera, right? We had this community, immigrant rights activists. But who we were missing is our amplifiers. We didn't really think about our amplifiers and our network builders and people who didn't have money to give but had other resources to give. And then who else is missing were other organizations. There were organizations where there was such old beef and we still weren't doing work together, but nobody who started that beef or had that beef with one another even worked at the organizations anymore, right? And I was there for 10 years, so I know what happened and I know like the end result, but like none of those people were around and those orgs may still not work together to this day. So I think we have the community mapping idea that we can expand our idea of our base for support by asking just a few questions and really digging down and really brainstorming. I think that's been the most important tool that I have learned and I now facilitate and teach and will be shared as a resource here.
I love that. And I think, Sarah, I would love for you to also be able to speak some more about giving circles and how that's another kind of community too.
Yes, the more Michelle was talking, I'm like, oh my God, I have the solution. Um, as you know, I'm focused on collective and collaborative giving. And, in collective giving, I'm guessing a lot of the people in the audience already know what giving circles are. For those of you that don't know, a giving circle is basically a group of people with shared values that gets together to create change. And I'm talking about change, not charity, right? Because I feel that something that is the secret of a giving circle is that people are really close to community. I love the community mapping that Michelle was sharing because with a giving circle, and I feel that we have been talking about, the big funders, the high net wealth individuals. With giving circles, what you are doing is creating that, support system around your organization from the community. And I know, we, the four of us have been fundraisers. A lot of you in the audience are fundraisers, and I know there are 24 hours in a day. And sometimes you tend to focus on, the three big gifts that let's, dedicate this time to get those big gifts. However, and especially in the moment that we're living right now, that so much of, those big grants are gone, we need to change things, to think things differently. And that is by, engaging your own community. Because, the power of giving circles, the power of community philanthropy is huge. And I'm going to share it in the chat. We did a research a few years ago, and this was just in the US. So you can multiply this many times over to talk about the world. But just in the US, there are about 4,000 giving circles that involve 370,000 people. And in the last 6 years, these giving circles mobilized $3.1 billion. So it's not a cute movement. It is very, very, very powerful. And the moment you have a giving circle, you don't have a donor. You have literally the donor that will have, the team, the jersey of the team on. And talking about, going beyond the financial donation. As Michelle was saying, right? We call it the 5 T's of philanthropy. You have the treasure, which is the money. You have time. You need volunteers. You need people to give their time. You have talent. You need people that are, lawyers, accountants, marketers on your board, close to you. And also the two other T's, ties and testimony. Ties, each of you, if each of us is part of a network. And a lot of times those donors that may be able to just to give you a little money, but they can open other doors for you. And your testimony, each of us has our voice, our, the way to amplify the mission of your organization. So think of your donors in a more expansive way and go from there. It's just, it's like a web.
And I think sometimes we forget the testimony piece. We kind of have our institutional narratives that we put forward as a nonprofit institution, but so much of what makes our stories really sing is the personal aspects of how that's interpreted. And Clara, because you also sit at this intersection of development and communications, I'm sure you have quite a bit that you would throw in on that storytelling narrative, how you see if it's landing with your audiences.
Yeah, definitely. I can come in on that. And I've just loved listening to Sarah and Michelle. So much resonates. And I'm also really curious to kind of learn more about giving circles. So I'll have to follow up with both of you. And on this storytelling piece, I mean, first of all, I often say like many fundraisers have the same superpower. Or we could say we have many superpowers, but one of them is the ability to take a wide range of complex information and weave it into a story, right? Something that makes sense, something that resonates. So I would say use that superpower, and don't be afraid to use creative framings, right? So I always say, don't take at face value what's on the website, right? Maybe I think about my work as human rights work. A donor is talking about democracy building, inequality. We can be creative with framings. The beauty about the trust-based relationship being at the center of fundraising is it gives you time to find that alignment, right? So it does require patience and persistence as well. It's not a quick turnaround, but through that process, you can find a place where your priorities and interests align. And anyways, I'm just thinking a little bit about actually an organization where I sit on the board. I think a lot of this is really relevant. So this organization is called Cristosal. It's a Central American human rights organization, and it does most of its fundraising through a US base of individual donors. So in 2025, last year, it had to deal with multiple crises, starting with the dismantling of USAID, but also other political challenges. And through that, it was really able to leverage that crisis as an opportunity with messaging, communications, and fundraising strategies. And there's a few things I think we can pick out here, that are applicable to everyone. So, and actually very related to what you were saying, Sarah. So the idea really is to invite people to be part of something. So the messaging is stand with us, walk with us, be in solidarity with us, not so much support us, right? So inviting people to be part of something. Also, careful messaging that's positive as opposed to negative. So rather than saying, let's fight against this, we're saying, let's stand for something, right? And there's actually like a good amount of research that says that kind of messaging is effective. And the last thing I would say is consistency. So in the beginning of these challenges, leadership made a very conscious decision to be bold, which was like a big deal also in the context. But then it was really consistent, and that really did pay off. And it had like a record year of mobilizing resources.
I wonder, Claire, if I can follow up on that and redirect you a bit too, because we also know that relationship building takes time, building trust takes time, that these are all incredibly worthwhile endeavors. But when you're inside of an organization, a lot of times there is that pressure to generate the revenue. And, it comes from a good place too, because the program doors have to stay open. The impact has to still be happening. And we can operate on these shorter cycles when we know that relationships is a bit of an art as well. So if you could talk a bit of what you've seen and to that experience of how you balance these different priorities?
Yes, it's a great question, and it is an absolute reality that we live in. So I'm going to start by saying that we need to take care of our fundraisers. It is stressful, it is high pressure. So I do this first and foremost with really intentional leadership of my team. Um, we use feminist principles to guide our team. We took time to really research and unpack these and know what they mean for us. And at the end of the day, what it means is people can show up authentically, people can ask for help. Again, we're looking to collaborate, not compete. This is important for ourselves in terms of supporting each other. It's also important for the organization because we don't want competition. We want to think about where is this funding truly needed. So that's like a slight pivot, but I think it's important to say, like, start by taking care of your fundraisers, making sure it's a healthy team dynamic. And then what I would say, like a little bit more directly to your question is, for me, we don't have to think about these as competing realities, but what we have to do is factor in the amount of time it takes to build the relationship. So if we're in a funding crisis right now, then the relationships I started building 2-3 years ago can help me get through this crisis right now. The relationships I'm beginning to build today can help me get through a challenge I'll have in 2 or 3 years down the road. So when we're thinking about our fundraising plans and when they will actually convert into funding, we need to factor in that, it does take time. And very concretely, in my organization, we do this through a decentralized structure with kind of hubs. We call them focal points that sit around our programs. So everyone becomes experts on those programs and is well positioned. Not too different from a giving circle, for example, but we're mainly dealing with institutional funders. But essentially, it also produces a diverse range of both current and prospective donors so that they're coming in on a cycle. We're working on some that we might expect will come in with funding in a year. We're working on others, maybe 3 years, and then of course we have our long-term partnerships.
And I think that, Sarah, you might kind of reframe that because for you, collective giving, that relationship is actually the revenue mechanism too. So they're not so much intention. I don't know if there's anything that you would want to add on this question of, balancing getting money in the door against the relationships as well.
I mean, you need at this moment in time, you need everything, right? Like, sometimes people say, "Oh, are you, against billionaires' money?" I'm like, I'm not against anybody. Like, we need the billionaires, we need the institutional funders, we need the collaborative funds, we need the giving circles, we need everyone. For me, it's more about we as fundraisers need to move from the transactional to the relational, right? Like, I feel that all of us in the audience knows that we can make anyone give to our organization once. The secret is get that person to care and to give, to get engaged. And the only way you can do that is, like Michelle was saying, right? Like, constant, information, communication in a way that is authentic, in a way that is not, I'm asking you here all the time, in a way that you're really building that relationship. Something that I wanted to mention too, and I think Claire, you mentioned this about, sometimes we don't know, right? We have not met anyone from the organization, but going to different fora, different conferences, different events where you are able to meet people, right? And I know we cannot hold everything in our minds, but having the discipline to, after you go to an event, write down who did you say you were going to follow up? Who are you going to, email tomorrow? Who are you? And not with an ask, you're building this relationship. And also, I, as I was telling you, I didn't start my career as a fundraiser. At the beginning, I was mortified. I was like, oh my God, how am I going to go and ask? And then you realize that when people say no to you, they're not saying no to you personally. They're not saying no to, and I never think of a no as a no. I think of no as a not yet. So unless the funder or the donor tells you, you know what, it's not now and not ever, this is not my cause, okay, you can move on. But, get the other no's as maybe a not yet. And I feel that, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, but as fundraisers, we need to listen a lot more than talk, right? We need to listen. What are those funders' motivations, that donor motivation, as Michelle said? Is that person an auntie? Is that person a neighbor? How do we start mapping what is the motivation for each person to be connected to a particular organization?
And I think to that point, even outside of the fundraising space, open communication and all of the relationships that we have nodes in them at some point. That's just being authentic and having connections with real people in a real context in their day-to-day lives. But I want, Michelle, for you to have a bit of an opportunity to speak about this question of the rejection or the silence, and how you can kind of build that into the relationship lens that you're taking, and carry that forward in the work that's being done.
Absolutely. Yeah. I loved Sarah and Clara's answers. As a co-founder of community centric fundraising, like those are like all of that is in line. Relational instead of transactional, transparency, utilizing donors as partners, and not someone that you have to, fake out to. I would say, I want to add one thing before I go into handling the no. Many of us come from different cultures, right? And this is an international call. I know in the United States we're very US centric, and sometimes that means that when we're handling our asks, we're going kind of straight to the ask. We're doing like a programmatic show, and then we're going into the ask. But many of our cultures, like I know most of the Latina cultures and Iranian culture, all Middle Eastern cultures, I think Asian, like just really broad swaths of communities have communal culture, and that means starting with a conversation. How are you? What's going on for you? Like really building a relationship when we're doing those face-to-face asks, or when we're engaging. I think if you can't do that, you have like 10,000 people on your mailing list, or 100,000 people on your mailing list. Finding the ways to be able to relationship build, or at least take the temperature of the people that you're connecting with. What is going on for them? What do they want to know about? I made early mistakes. When I was doing immigrant rights work, I was working at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project in Washington State. They're an incredible organization. And my emails, my communication as development director doing comms was, do you know what we're doing? We're doing impact litigation in the Ninth Circuit Court. And what that means is, we have a focus on pro se assistance. And it was legal language. Like Sarah said, in the United States, we love acronyms, full of legal jargon. But what did people really want to know? I didn't know. I didn't take the temperature of the organization. They wanted to know, how do I help my neighbor that just got detained? They wanted to know immigration 101, like, can you just educate me on the basics, right? They wanted more education, but I wasn't paying attention to what they wanted to know. I was telling them what I wanted to tell them. So really paying attention, taking the temperature. I think, Claire was also making the point that that relationship building takes time. We need to take care of our fundraisers. We need to invest in fundraisers. The number of organizations that I work with that have healthy budgets still, even now, and are not investing in fundraising, to me is astounding. Because they're not investing in relationship building. They continually are investing in programs, not understanding that raising money is the engine for all of the rest of the work. So treating our fundraisers well, and also making sure that we investing in communications. It's such an important part of relationship building. Every organization, even if you're a staff of 3, you should have someone's time dedicated to communication. I would say that, the silent part. So when we make an ask and we don't hear anything, and I'm guessing that's not really in the personal context, or maybe it's in the personal context, and we haven't heard back, or maybe we are relying on someone who's given us money over and over again, and then they're suddenly not responding. There's usually something going on. It could be a wedding, right? It could be the birth of a new child. It could be they lost their job. There are so many things that are happening and people don't want to talk about it. I lost my dad in August and it was terrible. And I was a significant part of his caretaking team. I moved cities. It's been a heartbreaking journey. And now I caretake for my mom who has Alzheimer's. Just like a small portion of my time, but it's made a pretty significant difference in my life the last 2 years. And that means that in my network of people who aren't my clients, I have been relatively silent. I haven't been able to be as responsive. Now I'm back in a mode where I'm starting back up again. But you'll notice, like, even in my podcast, there's a gap because I was caretaking and then in the process of losing my parent. And we just don't know what's going on. And not everyone has the capacity to be able to communicate that. So really thinking about the humanity behind it and not being afraid to be persistent. Like if Sarah is reaching out to me over and over and Claire is reaching out to me over and over and I'm not responding, I am receiving the message that they care and that they're reaching out to me and that I am cared about, or like my contribution is cared about, or I'm learning about the organization if this is about fundraising, right? I may not be responsive, but it's not a no. It's just silence. And yeah, I would say don't stop reaching out.
I feel like this conversation could go for 90 minutes, 2 hours, and I would not be tired of listening to all of the different perspectives that you're bringing. But I do want to pull a couple of the questions in that we've been getting from folks in the room. And I'm going to kind of combine a few of them. Because we know that this is a reality in the fundraising space. There are, especially on the institutional side, closed doors. They say solicitation, no open solicitation. You need to be invited. So thinking about how to navigate some of that and tactics that have worked to break down or open some of those doors a bit, which may tie to some of the places of where to connect, some of the gatherings that have been the most useful that you found. Someone brought up something like Skoll, which we've been talking about a little bit earlier in the green room, but other places that have been really productive for those types of conversations, but then how to handle it if maybe your team doesn't have the budget to travel to those too. So ways that you can be in person with folks, but also maybe some of these virtual opportunities to connect. So that's combining a few questions from our audience.
I can take a combination of some of them. Talking about the donor advice funds, right? The donor advice funds, yes, are specifically made so you don't have the relationship with the donor, and it's very frustrating. And we need to understand another actor in all of this, and especially in the US, which is the advisor, the wealth advisor, the lawyer, the philanthropic advisor. So another group of people that you need to make friends are the philanthropic advisors, because a lot of times, they are the gatekeepers. And they're a lot easier to get than to the actual, final donor. So I would say consider also the time to, build those relationships with philanthropic advisors. I know many of them and many of them that have been very, equity focused, right? So even though they may not be of a particular community, they understand the importance of moving money to a particular community. So they have taken their mission to to educate themselves and as a result, educate their donors about different organizations. So it's again, going to what Michelle said, how do you map that community that is around there? And yes, advisors, I'm not going to tell you it's easy because it's not. They are gatekeepers, and wealth advisors are really, it's a wall. right? But philanthropic advisors, they're a lot more sympathetic. And in case of conferences, I understand that, a lot of these international conferences are super expensive. It's really difficult to go. Um, you need to do your homework into figuring out who is going to be there and is it worth your time, right? For example, Skull, we were talking about Skull Forum. It's huge, it's a marathon. What I have seen many people do is they go to Oxford, but they don't register for the conference. And they just, you lurk around the different, side events. And there are many conferences like that. So maybe, in your city, in your country, which one is the big conference? And maybe you don't even have to register because the conversation is outside in the lobby so it's a little bit of having that mindset of guerrilla marketing for guerrilla fundraising, like where do you go to the side events of a big conference, because I agree with you, the conferences have become extremely problematic and expensive to go.
Michelle or Claire, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I can come in quickly. I mean, what I'll say is the beauty of the post-COVID world is that you really can connect virtually. I think, conference spaces can still be important if you're able to prioritize them, but I don't think it's a deal breaker anymore if you can't. In fact, I mean, sit at one level of the ecosystem, which is we're an intermediary collaborative fund, so we're both fundraiser and grant maker. But increasingly, we're finding that the private philanthropy, those donors are shying away a bit more from some of the conference spaces. So don't be afraid to try to reach out directly for those calls. And this is where I think Michelle's tool is so important, and I look forward to kind of learning more about it. We use it, but we didn't, have a name for it. But think extensively about your networks and your connectors. So, for example, in my organization, we often ask board members, who do you know here or there? We make lists of in a particular potential donor organization, key staff, key board members, because people might not realize, you name the donor, they don't know it necessarily, but they might know the people in it. So it's really about, yeah, doing a mapping of your network, seeing who can help you make that connection. And then again, back on this board where I sit, we often think that way too, right? So there's this belief that you need the high net worth individuals on your board to be a fundraising board, but actually those connectors can be just as, if not more valuable sometimes.
Absolutely. I don't know, Michelle, if you would add anything else or if we pivot to another question.
No, go
Oh,
ahead. Go ahead.
okay, great. I think that this is something that I've addressed with partners of ours who are coming to the US for the first time too. But then it's kind of how do you make the first friend, thinking about getting that first key contact. Also, just kind of pivoting off of this question, I think that a lot of times some of your closest friends within your organization on the board or just, friends and allies of the organization sometimes don't know that they have these contacts in their networks to be able to open those doors. So I do think that that's one of the big pieces is getting people over that hump to realize the ways that they can help. But, some of the challenges that you or the tactics you might recommend to someone who's finding it challenging to get that first friend, and combining this with another question here, which is obviously the cultural expectations in the US, if you're looking to enter the US, are very different from maybe some other places. So how can you balance that when you're working across these cultures?
I might just jump in and say again, the community mapping tool, you're about to receive it in your inboxes. I teach. I'm like on my 14th teaching cohort around community-centric fundraising or anti-racist fundraising, hired by different groups or different foundations to teach their grantees, or teach, sometimes it's nonprofit associations in different places. And in that work, I have discovered that it's just really important that we sit down, like if we're making our first friend, that we really think about that very first question of like, who are our people? Like the relationship building cycle, the first step in a relationship building cycle is identification. Who might be your people? Who are your people? Who might be your people? Again, in the example of a preschool, it's not only the kids and the parents, but it's relatives, it's people who are interested in intergenerational learning, it's people who are interested in geriatric care, et cetera, right? So like you have actually a lot of people, it's like-minded organizations with the same values, et cetera. I'm sure there's more. If you take a bigger topic like human rights, like what the work that Claire is doing, I mean, the possibilities are endless. Who cares about human rights? Many of us. I mean, again, my family's Iranian. Of course, I care about human rights. My family is very affected and lives in Tehran. Like, I am very, very concerned. The ceasefire has been, a great break, but like I'm right in there. I'm right in there with the Human Rights Fund. Like I'm one of the donors that they may not have thought about yet, right? So really just thinking about who might our people be. And I've worked with so many orgs that are small. They're like startups, or they're grassroots, and they've maybe compiled a tiny board. And the board's like, I don't know anyone because they don't know somebody who's like a billionaire. But going through that community mapping exercise again to think about who is in their network. Oh, we want to reach out to nurses. Do you know any nurses? All of us probably know a nurse. You know what I mean? So like really getting specific with that community mapping. Like who do we want to reach out to? Community centers, medical institutions. You can't just say institutions. Which medical institutions? Who do we know at the institution? Are we talking about doctors, nurses, administrative staff? So like really building in like time, a lot of time to really have these conversations. I think it's extremely valuable.
Fantastic. And I hate to be the one that's going to be drawing this to a close, but Sarah, I wanted to give you an opportunity because you dropped it in the chat, because this is another free resource for folks to be able to join, to give a little spotlight on that as well.
Yes, I want to invite everyone. May 12 to 14, we have our We Give Summit, and it's the only global convening for collective and collaborative giving. It is free. It is really fun. It's 2.5 days. Well, 2 half days and a little bit more. But even if you cannot join us live, you will get all the recordings later, and on the website you can also see all the content for the past 5 years. There are many panels around fundraising, many panels featuring international speakers. So we would love for everybody to join us.
Thank you. And I think really this has been such a fascinating conversation. If you three get together virtually or in person ever again, please invite me. I'd like to just be a fly on the wall. Thank you for allowing me to come along on this ride with you. And I think that there's a lot that I know I'm going to be taking back to my practice and work. And I hope that, I'm sure that the folks in the audience feel the same. So I can't thank you all enough for joining us today. Absolutely loved being here. And I do want to invite Marina back in to share a few closing words.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And again, thank you, Sarah, Claire, Michelle. We really appreciated the conversation. I hope everyone in the room found it practical, and as we close the webinar is, empowered to really take that knowledge and go to their teams and really kind of do something meaningful and improve their practices and just rethink also, what they're doing, how it can be improved. But yes, again, thanks everyone for joining us today. I won't keep you too long. I know we're right on time. We truly value your feedback as well. It really helps us also shape future webinars, but I'm sure the panelists as well would like to hear further, your feedback, something that resonated. So please feel free to just take our post-webinar survey, which will pop up as soon as you close the webinar. We also welcome you to stay updated by following us on LinkedIn and signing up to our newsletters. We will have future webinars coming up as well. Yeah, just once again, thanks everyone. Appreciated your time and being with us and just your engagement. Have a good rest of your day or evening. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thanks, everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.